Waiters, waitresses, what is the worst first date you've witnessed? Couple in their mid-20s comes in. It's obviously a first date, but they seem to really like each other and are getting along well. I wasn't serving them, however. I was serving the table next to them. About halfway through their meal I noticed them holding hands over the table. Cute. Then the guy lifts her hand to his lips and kisses the back of it. A bit of an outdated gesture, but still cute, I guess. The woman seems slightly confused but goes along with it. A little while later I see the guy do it again. Okay, dude. Then again. Woman is confused and looks a little uncomfortable. They are no longer holding hands. I go to serve my table and see the dude full on making out with her hand. Tongue and all. Woman looks extremely embarrassed and uncomfortable. Looking everywhere but at her date. I go over and casually ask if they need anything. And the dude stops. Woman yanks her hand back. She left pretty soon after. Not a server but a bartender. My girlfriend was serving an obvious first date and they were ordering an alarming amount of drinks with 30 minutes of sitting down. I asked my GF what was going on and she said the girl was doing all of the shots they ordered. I walked from behind the bar to the bathroom purely to check in on the situation, and good lord, this girl on the date was blasted and just saying every other word. Eventually the chick went outside to smoke and the dude beelined to the bar and asked if he could give me money for the waitress and sneak out. Actually gave $200 for a $70 tab, so nice. The girl came back in and ate the food they ordered, then tried to order more drinks. Had to throw her out and she started calling me a Ender. I'm very much a white dude. Bizarre ass night that my girl and I still talk about years later. I once saw the guy try and impress his date by pretending to know about wine. He then proceeded to pronounce every single wrong one. I don't even know how I would phonetically write out his butchering of Chablis and Sauvignon Blanc. Oh man. Thanks for asking this one. I've got a great one. Happened at my former restaurant. Reservation for 6:00. Young guy comes in a few minutes early. Tells me he's kind of nervous because it's a first date and he hasn't had many before. Blah blah blah. Kinda sweet really. Anyways. Girl arrives about half an hour late. And proceeds to get very drunk. About midway through the meal. She answers her phone. Takes the call. And starts talking about her date. In front of her date. Saying stuff like, well, he's not usually my type. I don't exactly like him. But I felt like why not? Right in front of him. Young man looks so discouraged. Walks up to me. Pays his bill. And leaves. He's a really nice guy. He's come to the place I work at now a few times. There was a couple sitting at the bar. Very clearly on a first date. About 20 minutes later I was back in the kitchen rolling silverware and the guy comes running back into the kitchen and says, "Is there an exit back here?" Didn't wait for a response. Saw the exit sign. And bolted out the back door. I'm not service staff but I often eat drink alone and people watch. And first dates are almost always painfully obvious. Worst one I ever saw. Two people who were probably perfect for each other. They were both completely self-absorbed. How completely? They both started stories and kept telling them at the same time. They weren't even listening. Just talking at each other. I was enraptured by the sheer insanity of it. I didn't eat for like 45 minutes as they both just yapped away. Barely stopping. This isn't as bad as some of the others, but the guy and girl arrived separately and it seemed like they were meeting for the first time at the restaurant. They sat down, then the girl excused herself and went to the bathroom. The guy ordered drinks for them both while she was gone then. After like 30 minutes. Ordered 2 meals. It was so obvious she wasn't coming back but he kept calling her and eventually just left all the food and drink untouched and paid the bill. He reached for his water and punched it directly into her lap. That's one way to make a girl wet. Bartended for a decade. For a while I was at a medium-range Italian restaurant. More than once I saw a first date go awry because one of the two drank too much. Most memorable was a woman who started downing rum punches. They were at a table so I couldn't see them, and I guess the waiter had forgotten his red light, yellow light training. I don't know if they still do that. After the 6th one I asked if these were all going to the same person and he said yes. I was like, oh. Sure enough. Girl ended up puking all over my bathroom and locking herself in. When we got the door open she was passed out and there was puke everywhere, including all over her. No cab would touch her, so the guy ended up taking her home. He came in a week later and said they were going on another date. I was skeptical. They've been married for about 15 years and are absurdly happy. She avoids rum punches. There was this young guy eating dinner with his mom. I noticed they seemed weirdly uncomfortable and distant but didn't think much of it. Turns out the lady was not his mom. He had met her on a dating site and had been very clearly catfished. The lady was at least a good 20 years older than him. When she left the restaurant he stayed behind and told me about what happened, then asked me out. I politely declined but agreed with him that was a really weird situation. I'm a bartender at Popular Burger and Wine Bar. I had an older gentleman, about 60 years old, come in on a Wednesday evening and order a bottle of wine and 2 glasses as he's waiting for someone to show. This other older woman shows up a short while later and both of them hit it off. They sat themselves right behind my post, so basically anytime I had to ring something in I had a front row seat to their date. Both of them crush 3 bottles of wine and sit there for about 4 hours talking away. Around the 4th hour of them sitting they both started making out randomly and will not stop. They started sucking faces with an uncomfortable intensity, somewhat terrifying all my bar guests and myself. At one point the older fella leaves for the bathroom and his date proceeds to let me know it's their first time meeting. Not entirely the worst first date for them I suppose, but definitely was for me and the other customers. Not a waiter, but me and my GF sat next to an obvious first date at a Pan-Asian fusion restaurant, Zen in Durham, UK. She comments that her main course wasn't quite what she expected and thought it'd be spicier. He then snaps his fingers above his head very loudly so half the restaurant turns round to look and a waitress rolls her eyes and goes over. He demands that they cook IT again and make IT hotter. Next thing, there's half a dozen Thai waitresses around the table calling him worse than entire. My Thai GF translated, causing a massive scene while her face turns red and they take her plate away. She then has to sit with no food while he continues eating. He eventually realizes he's ate up and stops eating, but she sarcastically tells him to enjoy his food. They brought her a fresh plate and they eat in silence. First and I'm sure the last date. I was hanging out at Starbucks and witnessed a horrible date. She was Japanese and he started off by showing her his shirt with sumo wrestlers on it. Then would ask questions like, "What's your favorite sushi? Do you only speak Japanese? How do you say toilet in Japanese? They have sumo in Japan, right? Did you see my shirt?" It was so amazingly awkward I bought another cup of coffee to listen to the entire thing. It was so amazingly awkward I bought another cup of coffee. Is that the Starbucks version of getting your popcorn so you can sit back and watch? I had a table I'm pretty sure was a married couple, in their 50s. Clearly together, etc. So call it a date anyways, as they were out for dinner together. So it qualifies in a way. They both ordered draft beer. When I was bringing it out, I came to the table and the woman was screaming and crying uncontrollably. The man bending over her. I thought she was having a medical emergency. Turns out she got a call that a parent had died. The man turned to me and shoved a card at me, asking to pay because they have to leave ASAP. And I said it's okay. They had not had anything. I was still holding the beers. And get this. I got a retoupe for doing this. As if I was going to make these people pay for 2 beers they never even sipped because a genuine emergency happened so the giant big corporation can add $12 to their $600 million. Couple years ago, I was tending bar at a high-end steak joint. A pretty brunette walked in and sat down at the bar. After fixing her a cocktail, I asked if she'd like to see a dinner menu. She explained that she was waiting for a date. A few moments later, the guy arrived. He was carrying a large bag, which he carefully set down next to him. It was immediately obvious this date was their first. Their conversation was lurching from forced to downright painful when he reached into the bag and pulled out an album containing his Pokemon card collection. He set the book on the bar and thumbed through each page, thoroughly and lovingly describing every card, attempting to educate his date in the ways of Japanese pocket monsters. I'll be fair to the guy, dude was passionate. She feigned an emergency and called her friend to pick her up. He stayed and ate a plain hamburger at the bar. Edit. Both of these people were in their mid-30s. If showing a girl your holographic Charizard card doesn't get you laid, then I don't know what will. I have no idea if they were on a date or been married for too long, but we had our flight cancelled due to a snowstorm on Christmas Eve. The only place open for dinner was an Indian restaurant. There were a few customers in there. It was an interesting looking bunch. Sort of what you'd expect eating out on Christmas Eve. This one couple though looked to be in their 40s. A guy and a woman. She never said a word and looked like she was in a trance. The guy though kept talking at her in this slow monotone. And another thing I hate about you, and proceeded to critique her while she continued to stare into space. She never said a word and looked like she was in a trance. The guy though kept talking at her in this slow monotone. And another thing I hate about you, and proceeded to critique her while she continued to stare into space. Sounds like a long-term abusive relationship. At some point she mentally checked out because she's heard it all before. Hope she eventually ditched him. Girl and guy came into the barbecue restaurant I worked at. They met at the door exchanging the usual hi, nice to meet you, etc. The guy was a complete dick. She ordered ribs and he said, do you want to keep that hot figure of yours or look like that chick over there? Points to slightly overweight woman. Then, when they were waiting to pay, he starts flirting with the chick behind them. She just waited until he paid, then left without waiting for the food. I served at a table where the woman looked frightened and had a body language like she's leaning away from the guy while gathered tight. My coworkers would ask me if she's okay after they passed through my section. The guy was sitting and leaning over the table. Looked like he was invading her space. Angry looking guy. He talked to her like she was a dog that just fed on the rug. When he went to the bathroom, I asked if she's okay and she said yes. I doubt he got a second date though. The dude was waiting in the parking lot, singing and playing guitar when she arrived. He was dressed very formally, except for his sandals. They ate and drank. He got up and squeezed in next to her on her side of the booth. She was trapped. She looked mortified the whole time. The whole thing was completely cringeworthy. I'm a host at a restaurant, but my first week working, a gay couple got in a fight in the middle of their meal, drawing attention from everyone in the restaurant. Before my manager could step in and stop it, one stood up and shouted, "You're the reason most people are straight," and left. Don't know if it was a first date, but it happened on Valentine's Day. I didn't take the order, but when we started bringing the food out, their table was full of food, more than enough for 2 people. As I was serving other customers, I noticed only the boyfriend was eating and the girlfriend was just on her phone the whole time. When they left, nothing was even half finished. They didn't take anything home. Witnessed a CPL on their first date having a few drinks. Started making out by the 3rd. Dude cried by the 4th. Started sucking on her finger. Cried again. Abruptly ran out of the bar and down the street. She paid. Came back 2 weeks later. I pretended not to recognize him to be nice. And he brought it up. "Sai, think you served me on a date 2 weeks ago." "Sai, I dunno man, I serve a lot of people." "Sai, it was you. Remember?" I cried and ran away. Work at a bubble tea restaurant right near a college. It's a nice hangout spot with dim lighting, comfortable furniture, and board games. A lot of first dates happen here. Probably the worst I've ever seen was this guy that looked somewhere between 17 and 19 years old who met up with this girl around the same age. They got teas and took a seat at a table and played a board game and talked. His mother sat at the table next to him the entire time and just stared them down. It made me feel so bad for him. But the icing on the cake is when she goes up to them at 8:30 and tells them that it's time for the two of them, her and her son that is, to head home. The guy is visibly ed but says goodbye to her and follows his mom out. Girl comes up to order another tea and I asked her about it. She was more than happy to fill me and the other girls in. This lady had essentially injected herself into the date, interrupting their conversation and critiquing her son's behavior. I had a guy come in who was supposed to meet his date there. He waited for a bit and I made sure to check on him quite often to make sure he was good. After about 30 minutes of him nervously waiting, he finally gave up and motioned me for the bill. He got a drink and a very small appetizer while waiting. I told him not to worry about and genuinely felt bad for him. I hope he's happy with someone now. I had the shortest date table once. I knew it was a first date because I'd greeted the lady and directed her to the bar while she waited for her date to arrive. And then saw them introducing themselves when he finally showed up. They ended up in my section. Her with an almost empty martini. Him still drinkless. Looked like the small talk was going somewhat well. Normal first approach. Good evening blah blah. What can I get you to drink sir? He orders a Jack and Coke or something similar. I can't remember exactly. And I ask the lady if I can get her another. Before she has a chance to answer, the guy interrupts and says a water will be fine for her. Normally, I'd ignore a comment like that or pretend like I didn't understand and ask her directly again. But didn't even have a chance. She went off on him. How dare you? etc and stood up. Apologized to the small dining room and to me. And walked out. Though clearly embarrassed. And speechless. The guy stayed and continued to order dinner for himself anyway. Super awkward. I was involved in the date but the story is about my waiter. It's a first date from a plenty of fish lady who I had been chatting with. It's at a medium tier Italian restaurant in North Kansas City. I get there and my waiter is a shaved head. Huge muscular guy, very low key and professional. I get a glass of wine waiting for my date. I eventually get a second glass of wine. About 30 minutes into it and no text responses. I tell him I'll just order some food to go. Guy is a total professional. Doesn't let on anything about what is obviously happening to me. Finally he brings the back with the to-go order in it. Sets it on the table and leans in and says I put some extra biscuits in there. I tipped him well and left. Not a first date, but the last date of a 50-year marriage. Guy literally confessed to cheating on his wife while they were sitting at my bar in the middle of a busy shift. Needless to say, she didn't give up about causing a scene. Edit. It was an old British couple who were vacationing in LA. I didn't hear how it started. But the first thing I remember was she kept saying, "How could you?" Over and over. Louder and louder. I was working the bar when a 19M, the kind of guy who seemed like he would have had a rough time in high school but has since blossomed, approaches a woman of a similar age. Walks up. Puts his elbow on the bar beside her. So, what do I reckon about the Foo Fighters? I'm not a waiter but sat next to one heck of an awkward first date. It seemed there was an older couple setting up two younger people and the four of them were on a double date. Anyway, the young guy was a complete douche. I distinctly remember him telling a drawn out story about his shirt and how it had square buttons and they were better for some reason. And he bought it at this exclusive place for men where they have hot women come and fit you for clothes. The rest of his stories were similar and he did most of the talking. The older woman was enthralled by the young guy's stories. The older guy and the young woman seemed annoyed out of their minds. To make things worse, the couple next to them were texting back and forth furiously and giggling the whole time. That couple was me and my wife texting about them. Guy and a girl are sitting at the sushi bar. Both order miso while they look at the menus. The waiter goes to take the rest of their order. And the guy picks up his menu and flips both bowls of miso directly into their laps. I hear him apologize. And he runs to the bathroom. I help the poor girl clean up the miso and herself. He comes back. Says he has to go get his spare pants out of his car. He returns 5 minutes later in dry pants. And they power through the awkward rest of the date. Honestly. One time I had two women arrive together. I figured they were just out for drinks. They requested a special table with a window looking out to the bar. Whatever. They're seated there and I serve them drinks when one of them stands up and runs around to the bar side. Apparently she and her friend were scoping out her husband and caught him at the bar with another woman. She starts yelling and cursing at them and the husband and other woman leave. She followed them into the parking lot shouting "You ain't liar," etc. I got a Thai tip from the two women. But it was worth the show at least. Probably not the worst. But only last night. A couple came in. Aussie guy and Japanese girl. She wasn't great at English but understood enough to order for herself and have a short little conversation with me while he was in the bathroom. The whole time he kept treating her like it was her first day in Australia and made the date seem more like a language lesson, getting her to translate words and acting like she didn't understand even when she clearly said "I understand." Was rough. The woman kept asking for stuff for her pigs from the kitchen. The guy was visibly embarrassed and not interested. It was awkward. I don't know if this counts but I attended bar at a country club. I worked the busy league nights. One night it was late and there was still a straggler that said his group left him behind and asked me for a ride home. Being young and naive, I agreed. The address he gave me directions to was a restaurant. Back then I had a BlackBerry and the cell phone GPS was still a very young technology. When we arrived, I was irate. He said he wouldn't give me the address for his home until I had dinner with him. I feigned getting out of my car so he would get out before me and then sped off, leaving him standing in the parking lot alone. I was working at a rundown pizza place. The dude starts checking me out, ogling me in front of his date. I felt so bad because the girl he was with looked like she put so much effort into her look. She was also out of the dude's league. She def noticed. Thankfully she wasn't rude to me as I think she recognized my discomfort. I'm a host. But once we had a gentleman come in and as I was bringing him to his table he warned his date may be a bit late. She shows up about an hour and a half later and I bring her to the table to find the guy is gone and the table is reset. I ask the server what happened and he tells me he paid and left about 20 minutes ago. I had already said well, he was here. So I had to explain he left her but she was more than welcome to keep the table and dine alone. An hour and a half? That's not a bit late. I once went on a date with a man who had no teeth. We met on a dating website. I had no idea because in all of his photos his mouth was closed. I wasn't even as bothered about that as I was about that he kept going on and on about his best friend who was a 15-year girl that lived next door to him. How great she was. How much time they spent together. About how no one understood their relationship. Mind you, he was in his early 30s. I stayed through the whole date but let him know I wasn't interested in a second. Nope. Not a waitress. But guy that was on a date. My date was almost 2 hours late to the restaurant so I went to the bar and ordered a beer. One of the waitresses saw me sitting there and came up to me and asked out for a drink after her shift that was about to be over. After I said I was waiting for my extremely late date I politely declined. Because I was stupid. Girl I was supposed to be out with finally got there and when she did it made me wish I would have said yes to the waitress. Even if it was out of pity was one of the low-key nicest things a random person has done for me.